So, you're the owner. You're the leader. But do you really know what that means? 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse number 2 says, "Moreover, it is required of a steward that one be found faithful." Find out why responsibility is number 4 on our Super 7 list of ethical standards on this episode of Doing Small Better with Layne Allen Fields. Come on, y'all. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Doing Small Better with Layne Allen Fields. I'm your host, Layne Allen Fields, and I help leaders of faith-based organizations and faith-based small businesses with revenues of $2 million or less improve their ethics, improve their effectiveness, and ultimately improve their earnings through coaching and consulting. So I've been driving home the point that every organization needs to have a very clear understanding of its moral and ethical codes. Those moral and ethical codes should be written out in some sort of a codes of conduct, professional standards, core value statement. Whatever you want to call it is fine, but it needs to be there. And these core values, these ethical standards need to be clearly written. Well, first they need to be clearly defined, then clearly written and clearly understood by you as the leader first, and then everyone else in your organization. For us, we've developed what we call a Super 7 standard, or a Super 7 list of ethical standards. And that would be respect, honesty, excellence, responsibility, compassion, and citizenship and fairness. That's 7 or 8. Let's do that again. Respect, honesty, excellence, responsibility, compassion, citizenship, and fairness. 7. So for today's discussion, let's go ahead and dig in on this idea of ownership versus stewardship and the responsibility that each one of those carry. Now, I remember one time I was working for another organization and I got so frustrated. And somebody asked me, "What's wrong?" And I said, I can't take this. I'm not an employee. I'm an owner. I'm not an employee. I'm an owner. And I'm used to owning my own thing. I'm used to being responsible for my own thing. And when I took some time to unpack that, I had to remember how wrong I was. Because technically, when it comes to the business that I'm responsible for and the organization that I run, I don't own it. I'm a steward. If your organization, your business, your company, your service, if it was inspired by God and if it is led by the Spirit of God moving through you and speaking through you, and ultimately, if it is operated for the glory of God, then actually God is the owner and he has made us stewards. So what is a steward? A steward is somebody who is responsible for that which belongs to another. Now, unpack that for a minute in your brain, because we tell people I own my own business, or I lead my people, or I run my own business. I get the heart behind what you're saying, but understand that words do have importance. I understand that you're not beholden to another person on how you function, other than the people that you're responsible to, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But you're not beholden to another person, but truly, you do have to answer to someone, and that someone is the author and finisher of your faith. That someone is the God to whom you say your business, your organization, your service, your product, whatever it is dedicated. And so to that end, yeah, you have to be held accountable but you're being held accountable by a power and an authority and a being who is much greater than you and I. Anytime I lost sight of that truth, I could see where things went wrong. Because this is what I learned, that with ownership, there is pride. And with stewardship, there is humility. Let me say that again. With ownership, there is pride. And with stewardship, there is humility. You may say, Layne, okay, you should have pride in what you're doing. I don't mean that kind of pride. I mean the ungodly kind of pride. I mean the selfish kind of pride. I mean the self-centered type of pride. Because with ownership, there is the aim and the goal to impress and please people. And there is a totally different pride point involved in that. But with stewardship, there is the singular goal of making sure that your operations are God-glorifying and thereby God-pleasing. And that's the difference between the way we as faith-based organizations should operate and those that are not. And so I encourage you today to take some time to really sit down and meditate on where you stand on this whole ownership, stewardship comparison. Because again, with ownership, there is the potential for ungodly pride. And we already know that the Bible says that God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And we already know that pride and a haughty spirit come before that downfall. And if you've ever taken a downfall, I have, and I know, and I can testify that it's because my ungodly pride got in the way and messed things up. But whenever I remain faithful to the truth, that I'm not per se the owner, but that I am the steward of what God has blessed me with, what God has placed in my responsibility, what God has put in my hand, what God has given me vision for, and what he has given me creativity for, and what he has given me operational insight for. When I remember that I'm supposed to be doing it for him, because of him, and ultimately dedicating it back to him, I'm amazed how smoothly operations went. I'm amazed that even when we hit trouble and crisis and deficit, and it seemed like a dry season, that God's provision, God's peace, and God's hand was still very clearly evident in our operations. So this is not to say that we don't have any ownership, because what do we have ownership of? We have ownership of the responsibility. What do you own? You own the responsibility. You own the responsibility to do things the right way. You own the responsibility to do things with integrity. You own the responsibility of teaching and training those under your leadership and tutelage, that it is not just your responsibility as the lead person, but it is their responsibility because they're attached to what we're doing. They're attached to the organization. They're attached to the business. So we're all responsible for doing it God's way, and we're responsible for doing it the right way. So yeah, we own something. We own the responsibility. That's what we own. But do we truly own the business? Do we truly own the organization? Do we truly own the product? Do we truly own the things that have been entrusted to us? No, we don't really own them because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, they and those who dwell therein. And so, yeah, what a privilege, a divine privilege it is to be the lead person. But to be the lead person comes with a tremendous responsibility. And the responsibility and the ownership is to handle it in a God glorifying manner. So let's take a look at 3 properties of a responsible leader. A responsible leader leads by example. A responsible leader takes ownership of problems and not just the credit. A responsible leader makes decisions with people in mind before profits. Let's break those down one by one. The first characteristic of a responsible leader in a faith-based organization and business is that that leader leads by example. I've always made it my business not to ask anybody to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. From sweeping the floor to preaching the sermon, from doing a sales presentation to collecting money. If I'm not willing to do it, and if I'm not willing to do it in a particular way, I wouldn't ask anybody under my tutelage to do it any other way. Because the one thing that a responsible leader does is to lead by example. But the other thing is, a responsible leader who does lead by example doesn't want to lead people astray by example. There's a great responsibility. You know, the Apostle Paul, he said, for us to follow him as he follows Christ. Well, the same principle applies to us as the leader of a faith-based organization in a faith-based business. We want the employees, we want the staff to follow us as we follow Christ. So are we demonstrating godliness? Are we demonstrating discipline? Are we demonstrating integrity? Are we demonstrating any of the 7 core values of respect, honesty, excellence, responsibility, compassion, citizenship, and fairness? If I'm not modeling those things out before my people, then I'm doing a disservice to the very people that God gave me responsibility to lead. So therefore, a responsible leader leads by example. Think about it. Is that your way as well? Or is that something where you can improve? Another characteristic of a responsible leader of a faith-based organization, faith-based business, is that we take ownership of the problems, and we don't just take ownership for the credit. In fact, the way I try to do it is when things go well, when we succeed, when we do a great job, I try my best to give the credit to other people, to esteem others greater than myself. But whenever there is a problem, whenever something did not go well, whenever we fell short of our commitments, I always stand up, step up, and take responsibility for it. Because the one thing that I find to be most frustrating is when I patronize a business or a service, something doesn't go right. Maybe the delivery didn't go right. Maybe something was broken. Maybe something just didn't turn out with the final look or the final quality that I expected as the consumer. When I'm the one that spent my hard-earned money and I can't find anybody to take responsibility, everybody wants to be first in line when everything looks good, sounds good, smells good, feels good, tastes good. But when I need somebody to address an issue, even if it's small, I can't find anybody. Are you a duck and dodge kind of leader? Or are you the kind of leader that says, you know what? We messed up. I take responsibility for it. I apologize on behalf of my organization, my team, and I'm going to do everything in my power, take every measure within my ability or our organizational ability to make this right. That's what a responsible leader does. A responsible leader doesn't just take the credit for the success, but a responsible leader takes responsibility for the failures, the mistakes, the flaws. Yeah. All those disappointing outcomes. A responsible leader takes responsibility for that. What does that mean? What does that do? There is an amazing thing that happens when the leader gives credit to all of the people around him or her that made a win possible. And then at the very same time, when that leader says, you know what, put this loss on me, I got it. Have you ever seen a quarterback of an NFL team or a high-level college team at the press conference after a win or a loss? If that quarterback is so quick to pat himself on the back after a win, but equally as quick to throw his teammates under the bus after a loss, or even the head coach, if they take responsibility for the win, we're the best, we're the greatest, we really did it today. But when things go wrong, if that guy had just caught the ball, if so-and-so had just made that throw a little better, or if that lineman didn't miss that block, or if that cornerback didn't blow that coverage, we might have won. I can tell you for a fact that leader loses the respect of the people on that team. The third aspect of a responsible leader that I want to cover today is that a responsible leader makes decisions with people in mind before profits. Don't get me wrong. Please do not misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm absolutely not saying that we do not want our organization or our business or our endeavor to be unprofitable. Not true. In fact, I want you to make as much money as you can make. But always remember that it's supposed to be purpose that drives our practice, that leads to the profit, but we cannot do it if we lose the people. So as a responsible leader of a faith-based organization, faith-based business, our decisions should absolutely keep people in mind first, because every decision we make will have some impact on the team, the employees, the subcontractors, the suppliers, the clients, in some way, shape, or form. I've made the mistake of making decisions based upon how it was going to first, foremost, and only impact my bottom line. How is it going to impact my money? And it just didn't go well. I made commitments that my subcontractors couldn't honor. When I couldn't honor those commitments, it frustrated the client. The client then put it back at me, frustrated me. And it was all because I did not have the full panoramic view of how that decision was going to impact people. I've even made the same mistake in ministry as a pastor. I've made some decisions that I just knew were right. I just knew were God inspired. But rather than talk to the people and talk to the team and get everybody's buy-in so that we could go forward together, I looked up and I was serving in this capacity by myself. And the frustration was immense. I can't even begin to express in words how frustrating it was, to the point where I had to go back to the drawing board repent to God, apologize to the people, and say, here's what I was thinking. I'm sorry I didn't talk to you about it first. But now that I'm trying to explain to you what it is I believe the Spirit is leading me to do, is it something that you think we can all get involved in and do together and go forward together? And with that one decision, the buy-in, I can't even explain to you how committed the people were who bought into the vision. And so just keep that in mind as you exercise your leadership responsibility, because this has long-term implications. And it's the long-term perspective that will earn you the long-term respect of those you lead and serve. It's the long-term perspective that will position you as a leader to be more effective. And it will position your organization to be more profitable. And in the end, I truly believe that if we take godly responsibility, which is stewardship, and ownership for the responsibility that he's given us to oversee, I guess could be a word. Yeah. To oversee what he's placed in our hands, then the more fulfilling the experience will be, not just for you, but for those who serve and work with you and for you. And the more money you'll make, because the organization is far more effective at what it does. So I think you get my point. I could go on, but I believe I've driven it home. How can we do small better? To remember that, moreover, it is required of a steward that one be found faithful. And what are we faithful over? We're faithful over the responsibility for the thing that God has put in our hand.